progress.
So hi, everybody. We are going to go ahead and do a final exam review today. Because we did the exam review last week for exam number 3, this week I'm really going to focus on units 1 and unit 2. Units 1 and 2, because again, we went through this last week. There is another video reviewing last week and all of unit 3 that you guys should have access to if you have any questions. So what I want to do first, like I said, like we've done before, is open it up. And if either of you have any burning questions you want the answer to, let me know. And then if not, then we will just run through the units and the notes for the units.
For me, as usual, I don't have anything specific. I just wanted to go through it with you. And I think it's fine for us not to really spend too much on the third one, since you already made a video of that.
Okay, perfect. All right, you guys can see my screen then? You're good? Okay.
Yeah.
So going back to the beginning of the chapter, what we had, right, the first section we went through was research methodology. So let me go ahead and I'm going to open that up and we'll go ahead and go through those notes. And again, if you have any specific questions, please just interrupt me because I'm not looking at the chat. So basic things, and these are going to be really important terms for you to know the definitions of: population, the complete collection of observations, example, all people with breast cancer. A sample is a subset of observations drawn from the population. So an example, 200 people with breast cancer recruited from the UCLA Medical Center. So when you are creating research, these are all important things to understand. So a major concern is selection bias, also called sample bias, which is when research participants in a sample are not representative of the population. So is our sample from UCLA representative of all people with breast cancer? Can you think of why or why not that sample might or might not represent the larger population with breast cancer? If I think about it, right, I'm thinking, oh, well, we're in LA. So the people who are getting treated for breast cancer have access to medical care at UCLA, right? Which would mean that they probably have good health insurance and they are from an urban area. And that might mean that they are in the middle class or upper middle class socioeconomically. And so understanding that selection bias is really important. So when we do research at universities, a large percentage of our actual population that we do the research on, or the sample that we do the research on, are all university students. How do we then make our research acceptable or usable to larger populations, right? So these are all ideas as we're designing research to come up with. So validity, again, know the differences between these two. Internal validity, how closely controlled is the study? And does the design allow us to make believable inferences, right? So how much control do you have over the study? How much has gone into the design? Is the methodology sound? External validity, are the findings true in the outside world? The results generalize to the population you are studying. And this is where what I was saying previously, selection bias might come in, might really feed into it, right? Will these results using this sample be able to be generalized and thus have sound external validity? So there are several different kinds of research designs. We're going to go through 4 groups of them. What we'll start with is the descriptive. And so these are going to be case studies, focus groups. The second is experimental. These are going to be experiment, quasi-experiment, randomized controlled trial. And then observational is going to be correlational, cross-sectional, prospective and longitudinal or cohort, retrospective case control. And then number 4 is meta-analysis. So we'll go through, and again, you guys stop me if you have any questions, but this is all pretty straightforward. So for descriptive research designs, you have case study. So a case study is a qualitative, in-depth study of one person. The information gathered via observation, interviews, archives. The advantage, it can be used to generate ideas and develop hypotheses for further study. The disadvantages are that it's not generalizable. Remember, we were talking about that validity up there. Can be highly misleading and lacks rigorous control. So when you're only dealing with one person, right, that it's only true for that one person. I think of one of the case studies that I think about a lot was what was it, Jeannie, who was was a young girl who was raised completely deprived of like learning how to speak and things. There was a lot of abuse there. And so, but she went through a ton of case studies done about her. If you guys are interested in that, you can look her up. It's actually
Is she the one that she didn't have any human interaction, like they kept her in a closet or something like that?
Yeah, that's the one.
Sadly.
Was that she was, yeah, so no one interacted with her. She didn't learn language skills or how to interact with people. She was abused as well. She wasn't fed. So she basically, they called her feral, right? That she hadn't been socialized because she hadn't gone to school. Her guardians hadn't socialized her. And so studying her is a case study, right? So that's qualitative, it's in-depth observation, interview, right? Archives, she was researched throughout her life. I think she's still somewhere now. At some point they stopped studying her. But then you can see, right, how that can be misleading. It's very rare for someone to have the life circumstances that Jeannie did, right? So that case study of her is not generalizable. Generalizable. So descriptive, another descriptive study design is a focus group. So in a focus group, a group of people are asked about their experiences within an interactive setting where all people are free to talk with each other. Information gathered via describing and analyzing the group conversation. So advantage can be used to generate ideas and develop hypotheses for further studies. Disadvantages, again, not generalizable, can be highly misleading, lacks rigorous control. One thing I'm going to point out about both of these is that if you notice, if you were the researcher, right, this one, it says qualitative in here. And this is going to be qualitative too. You really are looking at themes. I've done qualitative research, and what we do is like thematic coding, where you would have 3 different people look at the same block of text and create codes out of it and see if they agree. And then you can analyze it using to see what the alpha score is if you're looking to kind of test validity. But both of these really look at the researcher to interpret the information, not statistically. Does that make sense?
Yes. It's not, it's more like talk based and perception, right?
Right. So like
to the actual math. Well, like you said, statistics.
Right. So exactly. So they are, and there's a lot
versus quantitative.
Right. So qualitative has a lot. So I know a lot of people who do qualitative research, and they do qualitative research because it does generate new research ideas, right? You are seeing what people are actually saying. So I worked in the qualitative lab that in undergrad that looked at sexual assault. And what we did was we would interview sexual assault survivors about resources that they found helpful. And they were open-ended questions. And so what we would do is we would read through all of these transcripts and we would find commonalities and create a code book for it. And that, again, is not generalizable, right? Like that code book will not be good for any other research. It's going to be good for that project. But what it did do is it made us realize that there were cultural differences in how these survivors were dealing with sexual assault. And that led to a study that was able to be done, that was able to be mixed methods so that there was some quantitative analysis in there as well, which then helps the validity of it. So now we're going to move into more quantitative design. So we have experimental. The experimental group, we have an experiment, cause and effect, right? This is the kind I think you'll probably think of a lot, independent and dependent variables, using random assignment, experimental control groups. The advantage is that it can purport, like, say that there is causality. Disadvantages, it costs a lot of money to run these, time consuming and not always appropriate. So quasi-experimental is 2 or more comparison groups, but the groups differ when the experiment takes place, right? So age, sex, socioeconomic status. This is not random assignment. So it's a close approximation of true experimental design and can be used when random assignment isn't practical or doesn't make sense given the target population. So disadvantage, third variables, other reasons why the groups may differ. This is where you start running into confounding variables, right? The famous one of murders and ice cream consumption both go up in the summer. Therefore, as people eat more ice cream, they murder more people. Or it just gets hot, so people eat more ice cream, and the hours are longer and they're angrier, so they kill more people, right? They're not correlated. Or they are correlated, but that doesn't mean that that there's causality there.
The cause.
Right, so then we have randomized controlled trial. Experimental studies designed to test the effects of an intervention. So medication, psychotherapy, right? Experimental group, also often called the treatment group. This is the gold standard of evidence-based practice. Most common variation, you can look through it. So again, this is rigorous, can report on causality. Again, expensive, time consuming, not appropriate for all research questions and situations. And then let's see, observational, correlational, cross-sectional, collect data from a sample at one specific point in time, does not involve manipulating variables. Advantage, pretty cheap and easy. Disadvantage, cannot tell us about causal relationships. So this, right, so this is going to tell us more about correlations. So consideration, correlation versus causation. Positive correlation as one, so this is important, people get confused about this all the time. As one positive, as one increases, so does the other. Negative, as one increases, the other decreases, not both decrease, right? So let's think of a negative correlation. The more I run, the less I weigh. That's a negative correlation. Even though it seems positive, right? It's still a negative correlation.
It's it's directional, not.
Yeah, it's perfect. It is directional. It is not talking about the quality.
Right, good or bad, yeah.
Right. It's quantitative. It's a quantitative term and not a qualitative term.
Got it.
Perfect. So considerations, correlation versus causation. A variable may predict another variable well, but that doesn't mean it causes the other to occur. Causation can be asserted in experimental design if the variable of interest are correlated. One variable occurs before the other in time, and there are no third variables. So like my thesis is correlational, right? And what we do is we report significance, right? Or you can say, for my thesis example, I can say that people who had higher resilience scores at the beginning of the pandemic, that predicted that they would have higher pandemic academic scores, right? And so in that, and it's very important you use that word predict, right? You're not saying anything is causing it. It's predicting that it might cause it, but it's not, a prediction is not a certainty. So next we move into observational. You have a phenomenon is studied over a period of time using the same participants. Longitudinal design, so this is a longitudinal, does not involve manipulating variables. It can evaluate how change occurs naturally over time. Disadvantages, it's a lot of time and money. Attrition, right? Attrition, you lose people. And that's a really hard thing. And it can't really purport causality. Cross-sectional and correlational versus perspective versus longitudinal cohort. So you guys can look through these. I'm going to keep going through because we still have a lot more to do. A phenomena, so retrospective case control, a phenomenon is studied by collecting data on variables of cases and or controls to reconstruct the conditions that led to the situation. Data collection backwards, going backward in time. So good for rare diseases and conditions, less time and money. So if you had a rare disease, right, you might start with the disease itself and work backwards. Where did the person go, as opposed to looking at the larger population and trying to narrow down to that one person. And then finally, you have a meta-analysis, right? So man, do I love meta-analyses, at least when I am doing research, like a literature review. I love to find a meta-analysis because that means that someone else did a very thorough research or literature review on the subject as well. So a meta-analysis is going to synthesize the results of studies investigating the same effect. So it summarizes the existing evidence. Advantages, increased confidence in the findings, replication. Any researcher should be able to follow the statistical steps and reach the same conclusion. Disadvantage, time and therefore money. It takes a lot of time to be able to, I think, say that you have done a meta-analysis of a topic. So there you go. I would again go back through and make sure that you know the definitions for these and can, for the most part, tell the difference between them. So any questions, outstanding questions on that?
No, not so far.
All right, so now we're gonna go. And again, we will go until 12:30 and see what we get through. I did do another review for the unit 2 as well, that there's a video of, so I'll send that out if we don't get there. But we did not do a full review of unit 1, so I'm happy to spend the most time there. So if you have attended or watched any of these videos before, we talk a lot about how important in health psychology models of health. And it's, I've always thought that it's different than other forms of psychology, than other types of psychology in that aspect, right? So health psychology, that we look at why people behave the way we do, and a lot of that is based on models. And why their health behavior is the way it is. So what we're going to do with these models of health is, again, definitions are important. Models of health are conceptual frameworks for ways of thinking about health. A diagnosis, identifying a disease or illness through medical observation of signs, symptoms, patient's history, and tests. An intervention, any action to cure illness or improve health. Prevention, any action to reduce or eliminate the cause onset, complications, or recurrence of disease or illness. So, history of the biomedical model. So the biomedical model is kind of the oldest model of health, right? Or when we are looking at why are people healthy? Are they not healthy? Why are people getting sick? What is disease? So for a very long time, you looked at supernatural disease results from sorcery, taboos, supernatural possession, losing one's soul. I love to read historic literature, and there used to be a thing called the King's Curse, that they actually, like, apparently if the king touched you and then you could die, right? And that was a type of disease. And they had, in the year 1600 in London, like 400 people died of the King's Curse. What was that, right? So you're looking at assigning meaning to things, that need to find reasons why things happen. So then you move into like Hippocrates, and this is where you get the Hippocratic Oath. So Hippocratic medicine started with Hippocrates, and that is disease is a natural process. And for Hippocrates and the Greeks, it was the imbalance of the four bodily humors, right? So the four humors were, what was it?
I think it was
Oh,
phlegm. Was it phlegm, blood, bile?
yeah, that's right. So it's
And I can't remember the other one.
3, 4, 5.
right. Yes. So it was phlegm, blood, bile. Well, I actually can probably look it up. Oh, it's 2 kinds of bile. That's why. So,
Okay.
so that was the idea, right? That disease meant that these 4 parts of you were not in balance. And this is also, though, where you get the Hippocratic Oath, right? So Hippocrates was talking about how it was your job to take care of people, that you are, and it's still, something, it requires, this position to kind of swear upon this idea that you're going to make sure that you're taking care of people. And so that kept going. And what we're looking at is the real big change occurred with germ theory. So the story of Louis Pasteur, you guys know, like pasteurization. Everything now is pasteurized, which is why when you're pregnant, you can't eat soft cheeses because they're not pasteurized. And that pasteurization led to kind of people realizing that maybe if we restrict the kind of what we touch or wash our hands, people won't get as sick. And obviously that was successful, right? So that led to things like penicillin, success in surgery, physician specialization, centralization of healthcare, and standardization of training. So the biomedical model is an emphasis on anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry as the cause of illness. Factors that influence health: genetics, microorganisms, immune system, physiology, gender, age. So the biomedical model has a disease-oriented approach to the patient. The patient is a complex set of anatomical parts and physiological systems. And it kind of refers to the patient by their illness. So biomedical model is I associate it to diagnosis, treatment, and cure, right? If I go to the doctor, they're not asking, well, now they do. There's a lot more concern about maybe things that are going on outside of you physiologically, but with the idea of, oh, this hurts, you have a broken arm, here's how we treat it, and this is taken care of. So here's again what the biomedical model looks like. So Rene Descartes, who is the I think therefore I am guy, he was kind of the first neuropsych when he talked about reactions. So the Cartesian view, I'll read this to you. So also the human body may be considered as a machine so built and composed of bones, nerves, muscles, veins, blood, and skin, that even if there were no mind in it, it would not cease to move in all the ways it does at present when it is not moved under the direction of the will. Right? So they saw it as kind of a machine. So biomedical model advantages. So it advanced understanding of diseases. There are acute disorders that can now be effectively treated, extended life expectancy, and improved quality of life. Disadvantage, reductionist, right? Narrow view of health. Can the complex phenomena of health be reduced to the language of chemistry and physics? The reason I'm studying health psychology is I believe absolutely that it cannot be. There are so many other things that impact a person's health. Less helpful for understanding and treating chronic disease. Also, it's expensive. So an alternative, the biopsychosocial model, which is what psychology really uses. It's a broad approach to help assuming the influence of the biomedical or biological factors, so genetics, microorganisms, immune response, psychological factors, cognitions, emotions, behaviors, and social factors, the influence of others and culture. So the biopsychosocial model was a response to the biomedical model that brought in psychosomatic and psychoanalytic perspectives. So this was introduced in 1977. And when the idea was that the Human Genome Project, which was, the idea to map the entire genetic sequence of humans, didn't answer why the differences in health. So the major contributions of this biopsychosocial model have been development of behavioral epidemiology. So like cigarette smoking identified as a risk for heart disease, physical activity and obesity being linked to heart disease, new technology for behavior change. So this is, you have Bandura. Bandura's principle of behavior modification. So if you remember Bandura with social cognitive theory, the Bobo doll, he actually just died a few months ago, like 96 years old.
Interesting.
I know, I actually am very upset. I was supposed to go to a conference where he was going to be at, and then the pandemic happened, and then he died. But he was the one who modeling, right? That
Right.
that people react to the people around them and how they behave.
Right.
So I'm going to let you guys go through these studies because that's just going to take time. So we're going to compare the models. And I know we did this in class. So type 2 diabetes is a serious chronic disease where the pancreas does not make enough insulin, or the body cannot use the available insulin well. This leads to a buildup of glucose in the blood, which can damage the body, right? So the type 2 risk factors include being over 45, family history, being overweight or obese, high blood pressure, low good cholesterol, low physical activity, and then and BIPOC identification. So if you are seeing, as a clinician for type 2 diabetes, you would absolutely have to use the biopsychosocial model, right? Because type 2 diabetes, unlike type 1, really is associated with behaviors. And those behaviors are not biological.
Right.
And now there are obviously some things, right? Like there are genetic, so there's a risk factor if you have family members. Again, race, there's a racial component as well. So those are biological determinants, which the biopsychosocial model kind of takes into consideration. So the challenge to health psychology: can psychosocial factors influence the course of organic disease? Psychosocial factors have been shown to influence the course of organic disease by biologically plausible mechanisms. Cognitive behavioral interventions do reduce the level of these psychosocial factors. Such cognitive behavioral interventions have been shown to improve clinical outcomes in organic disease. So that's kind of what we went through and what Dr. Mers went through, at least in Unit 3. Right, we were talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, or the papers that you guys just wrote, applying a cognitive behavioral therapy technique to a behavior. And so there is a lot that shows that that your physical health and the diseases and disorders and the organic disorders itself can be impacted by psychosocial factors. So moving on, we've got about 25 minutes. So health in the United States, estimated healthcare costs per person for selected countries. The US spends more on yearly healthcare per person than any other industrialized nation. One reason for a low ranking is overemphasis on state-of-the-art cures instead of prevention, right? We kind of wait till people get sick and then cure it as opposed to preventative medicine. So what is the cost? Costs for healthcare can be split into direct and indirect costs. So direct, the cost of the health services, whereas the indirect are the resources that are used as a result of the health, or we're taken as a result of the health condition. So diagnostic tests, right? Direct costs. Day of lost work, indirect. Loss of wages, indirect. Insurance costs, direct. Surgery, direct. Physician visits, right? So you can see how there's different kind of costs associated with it, especially in the United States. And so 3 models of aging associated morbidity. There are, let's see, hold on, because I'm not sure. Okay, so if you look at these, so let's say we were talking about moving to treatment, right? So this is current. You spend 60 years of your life healthy, right? 10 years of your life in chronic pain, and then 6 years of your life disabled. And that's if you get no treatment. So let's say you get treatment once that disease kicks in at the same time, right? You then still spend, but you're spending 15 or 20 years chronically ill and another 20 years disabled, but you live to 90. Or if you're using preventative treatment, you are healthy until you're 75, and then 5 years chronically ill and 5 years disabled. So you can kind of see how the idea with preventative medicine would be that it might not mean that you live longer than the treatment, right? But the quality of life and the years of healthy life are much, much longer. And instead of hitting chronic illness at 60, you're almost 80 years old. And so that's what they're looking at with preventative medicine. So additional good years of good health after age 65. So the leading causes of mortality: heart disease, malignant neoplasm, that's cancer, cerebral vascular disease. It's what is cerebrovascular disease? Vascular disease is a stroke. Boom, it is a stroke, called it. So you have pneumonia, unintentional, so accidents, diabetes, flu pneumonia, Alzheimer's, nephritis, nephritic, those are kidney, sepsis, and others. So and then you go into the risk factors, right? So we're talking again about modifiable behaviors, tobacco, poor diet and physical activity, alcohol consumption, microbial agents, toxic agents, motor vehicle, firearms, sexual behavior, illicit drug use, right? These are all, and in fact, we go back through these, and in Unit 3, we go back through all of these risk factors. So these are, if you ever see anything that Dr. Mers is calling cool epidemiological terms, that means she wants you to know it, right? So you're going to want to know that a risk factor is an attribute, characteristic, or exposure of an individual that increases the likelihood of developing a disease or injury. Relative risk is the strength of relationship between a risk factor and rates of morbidity and mortality. Population attributable risk is the societal burden of the risk factor in terms of unnecessary morbidity and mortality. So we will skip the group practice. Let's see. Okay, so epidemic, occurrence of disease in a community or region that is in excess of normal expectations and derived from a common source. So epidemic, right? I don't know if you guys remember like the SARS 10 years ago, right? There was an outbreak of SARS, COVID actually, not COVID-19 in, let me see, it was
It was in
2002.
Asia, right?
Yeah, in Asia, right?
Yeah.
So that was 2002 to 2004, and it was a strain of coronavirus. But because it wasn't worldwide, it was an epidemic and not a pandemic. Because it was confined to Southeast Asia. So endemic is habitual presence of a disease within a given geographic area, right? Malaria, mosquitoes. We get West Nile virus in the summer because the mosquitoes. Those are going to be endemic diseases. And then pandemic, COVID-19, right? It was an epidemic that was not controlled and became worldwide. And we are, so this, please know these things. 3 types of prevention. Primary, actions taken to avoid disease or injury. Secondary, actions taken to identify and treat a disease or injury in order to stop or reverse it. Tertiary, interventions to contain the damage caused by a disease or injury that has progressed beyond the early stages. So if I want to, let's say there are 3 twin sisters, 3, that wouldn't be twins, there are triplets. And so they all have the same genetic vulnerability for type 2 diabetes, right? Sister 1 takes advantage from the beginning, watches her diet and watches her exercise and doesn't smoke, etc. Right? So she's taking primary preventative steps. The other sister has become pre-diabetic. I was like, oh no, I just tested pre-diabetic, right? This isn't great. And then she starts dieting and changing her exercise habits. Those would be secondary. That would be a secondary prevention, right? Actions taken to identify and treat a disease or injury in order to stop or reverse it. That might be starting to, whether you're going to see a doctor about it, maybe a nutritionist, right? Secondary prevention, you're going to have to take larger steps than if you had just done a primary prevention. Tertiary preventions are interventions to contain the damage caused by a disease or injury. So the third sister who got the pre-diabetic test back, but was like, whatever. She might now have to take insulin, right? So you can see how, depending on the timeline during which that the possibility of a type 2 diabetes diagnosis in the future was addressed, depended on and how much it cost so much more money and was so much more time consuming and really could have caused a lot of bad health waiting until the disease had progressed beyond those early stages, right? So that tertiary interventions, those tertiary preventions cost a lot more money and also are just a lot more commitment, right? Giving yourself shots of insulin is a big deal because then you still have to eat healthy and exercise. In addition to what Sister 1 was doing, those are things in addition to now having to try and contain the damage that was caused. So let's see. So primary prevention, so prevalent right now. Vaccination and herd immunity. The resistance of a group of people to a disease because a large, so here we go. What is herd immunity? Herd immunity is the resistance of a group of people to a disease because a large proportion of a group members are immune. How does it work? If a large percentage of population is immune, the entire population is protected. And there is low likelihood that any one person with the disease will come into contact with a susceptible individual. So we know these numbers a little bit more now, right? It's not necessarily to be 100% immunized. You don't have to have 100% immunization to reach herd immunity, right? It's like 85 or hold on, just pulled that number out of nowhere. What percent is herd immunity for COVID? So for COVID, what they are saying, I think it's up in the 90%. I can't pull it up really quickly, but you know that in populations, you're going to have people who can't get vaccinated. You have people who are immunocompromised, right? So if we have people who just had a lung transplant, they can't get vaccinated. We have to protect. The idea with the herd immunity is that you protect those who cannot get those vaccines. So we've got about 15 minutes. Let's go on to stress and body. So what is stress? Stress is a negative emotional experience accompanied by predictable biochemical, physiological, cognitive, and behavioral changes. Stressors are environmental events that can lead to stress. It's important to note, guys, that stressors are not necessarily negative. Planning your wedding is a stressor. Even though that's, for most people, a positive experience, it is still creating stress, right? The holiday season creates stress, even though it's a positive thing for a lot of, if you're celebrating this time of year, it's a positive thing for a lot of people, but it is still stressful. There's a lot going on. So types of stressors, frustration, which is unpleasant tension resulting from a blocked goal, conflict, forced choice between two or more incompatible goals or impulses. Types of stressors, and we talked about these at least in one of the papers, daily hassles, small everyday problems that accumulate, traffic, chronic stressors, ongoing, long-lasting, unpleasant events, career burnout. Poverty is a huge one. Living your whole life in poverty creates a huge amount of stress on your immune system and just on your life. Life changes, events requiring making an adjustment to behavior or lifestyle. Marriage, starting school, moving into the dorms. Cataclysmic events, tremendous stressors that may occur suddenly or an ongoing horrifying experience. War trauma. You might have, if you have, any kind of trauma, adversity, death in the family, those kind of things that come out of nowhere. Cognitions. So yes, even your thoughts can stress you out in the absence of a true event. I'm like queen of this. If I don't have something to stress out legitimately, I will find it and I will make it up if I can, right? That our mind sometimes creates something, anticipating a negative event. Self-fulfilling prophecy is a good example of this, right? Like, things always go wrong, so I'm sure it's going to go wrong again. So, actually the Holmes and Ross social readjustment scale, I am actually using in my thesis, a list of 43 stressful life events. And it adds up values for all events that pertain to you over your past year, where higher scores indicate greater number of stressors. So on mine, I used 32 of the 43, we used 32. And we had scores. The score was like, if you have 150 and below, low stress, 150 to 300, moderate stress, 300 or above, then you've experienced extreme stress in the last year. And again, if they're negative and positive, and the one that I used is for students, right? But based on the idea that important life changes, both positive and negative can be stressors. So dimensions of stressors in the event, negative or positive. Is it uncontrollable or controllable? Unpredictable or predictable? Ambiguous or clear-cut? related to a central or peripheral life domain. And so I know we go through later, I don't know that we're going to get time, right? As you're going to go through when we are analyzing those, the primary appraisals, right? Appraising the stressors in our lives. So psychoneuroimmunology is a subfield of health psychology that emphasizes the interaction of the psychological, neuroendocrine, and immunological processes in stress and illness. So how does the body respond to stress? So we have Walter Cannon's fight or flight response. We know that it's fight, flight, or freeze. Upon perceiving a threat, the body is rapidly aroused via the sympathetic nervous system and endocrine system. Outpouring of epinephrine, cortisol, and other hormones that prepare an organism to defend against a threat can be adaptive, and it may contribute to stress-related illness. If your body is constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop or something to happen, right? Your body gets worn down from that. So, and you see that with Selye, Hans Selye, general adaptation syndrome, alarm reaction, right? Stage of resistance and stage of exhaustion. If you are constantly waiting for a bad thing to happen, or if you're constantly worried in the state of like, if poverty or experiences of, living in experiences of racism, etc., right, are going to keep your system at that stage of resistance a lot more than people who aren't experiencing those. So your nervous system. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I have a question really quick.
Yeah.
So in his model there, is it Selye?
Selye, yeah.
So in the general adaptation syndrome, is it then that the person that is constantly in the state of stress, when the stressor may occur or may like catapult or climax, is the person then unprepared due to the fact that they've been in that state for so long, or are they still able to react?
So, and that Selye didn't deal with that, but my understanding, so what you have is you're talking about like your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So when your sympathetic nervous system, when something, all right, so let's say I hear a loud sound, right, outside. And so I'm on edge because I'm not sure what it is. And so certain things happen, like my pupils dilate, my heart rate increases. You lose any sense of hunger. There are physical reactions that happen when your sympathetic nervous system engages. For people who experience a lot of stress, that sympathetic nervous system is always engaging. And so here, actually, I'm going to go down here because it looks like we're going to deal with this.
We're going ahead of ourselves. Okay.
Yeah, we're ahead of ourselves. So let me, but yes, that's exactly. So what happens is that then it breaks down your immune system and you get sick because you're constantly on alert, right? So sympathetic nervous system, adrenal glands, so located above the kidneys. So fight or flight response. And yeah, it basically just exhausts you, right? When your body is, and you can read through these. I don't know how much she's going to do on this, but I would read through it. So specific immunity, so natural immunity, acquired immunity. Stress can get into the body and make us sick. So this is kind of what we're talking about, right? Acute stress or chronic. And these are the ones that cause the psychophysiological reactions. So that's there it is, allostasis. So homeostasis, right, is maintaining the internal equilibrium through adjustments. Allostasis or allostatic load is the cumulative long-term effects of the body's physiological response to stress, right? So when your body is responding to stress more, you have a larger allostatic load. And that means hypertension. blood pressure, right? That's just your heartbeat because you're stressed. Your hippocampal volume, it actually decreases the size of your hippocampus, which can affect memory. It increases abdominal fat, decreased cell, decreased immunity. You have high epinephrine and high cortisol, which are stress hormones. And so there are physical changes in your body, right? So the adaptive short term is it gives you energy, right? That blood pumping, eyes opening, not hungry, right? Reduced digestion, reduced reproduction, temporary sharpened cognition. All of these things are really important when you're in a situation that's dangerous, right? If there's a lion coming at me, it's good for me to mobilize my energy, my heart rate going up, that I'm not hungry, don't want to have sex, and that I'm thinking smarter, right? But over the long time, the long-term effects, right? It's going to make you exhausted. It's going to give you hypertension and diabetes, ulcers, that reduced reproduction is amenorrhea, impotence, loss of libido, cognitive impairment, and neuron death, impaired immune system. And so these long-term exposures to stressors, again, negative and positive, really impact your physical health. So we are running out of time. What I'm going to tell you to do is know the immunosuppression model, okay? Know the diathesis stress model, and go through as well. What I will do is I will send out this video, and I will also send out the videos for number 2, for video 2 or unit 2 and unit 3 that we did last week, so that you can kind of have, at least we've gotten through the majority of unit 1 right now. Actually, yeah, we got through unit 1. So what I would do for you guys, again, go through that stress and body notes. You're going to want to know, I'll pull that back up. Diathesis stress model is an important part of this, and the immunosuppression model. So this was something we wrote a paper on at one point, or at least a discussion. I think maybe it was a discussion post. So make sure you guys know those, and I will go ahead and send out an email containing all of the videos as well. But let me use the last few minutes to see if anyone has any other questions.
No, thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you
Just
guys
know
so
all the
much.
models, right?
Know the models. Know the models. All the models. That's the biggest
Yeah.
one. And then I'll see you guys in class tomorrow. But other than that, good luck. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions.
We don't have class tomorrow, do we?
Oh, do we? I don't know. Never
I
mind.
think
then.
I think
no,
we
I don't think I think we're done with
Oh, you're right. She said we're done. So
Yeah.
don't,
Is this the
you
final
won't see me in class tomorrow. Don't go to class. All right.
Thank you so
But
much.
if you
you
have
so
any
much.
other questions, or if you go through this and have any other, I think that Dr. Merz has like a 3-hour office hours tomorrow. And
Okay.
so if I were you, this would be a good time I'll send out all these videos once this one uploads. Here, I'm going to stop it real quick so we can start the process. So once this stops